Good evening.
Good evening. Welcome to the Niederhofer Senate Market Web installment of December 17th. The market's always mysterious and exciting, and today there were a million wrinkles, but strangely, almost every market ended right at the open. The S&P opened at 1312, closed at 1312. The DAX 1360, 13.671, ended the same 13.671. The yen was unchanged. There was one market, however, that didn't end at the open, and that was bonds. They were down a point today. Crude was basically the same at the crude was the same as the open. Euro dollar was the same. Gold started out at 1895, ended at 1891. All right, but the most exciting thing today was that everything is up. Everything is at an all-time high. Every market is at an all-time high. The grains are at an all-time high. The Euro stocks are at an all-time high. DAX is at an all-time high.
What do you make of it? What is your prediction?
Well, more important than that, my prediction is inflation. That's what my prediction is. But I call this a Baron Coleman day. Now, Baron Coleman was the founder of Hospital Affiliates and Hospital Corporation of America and the Tennessee Building Products Company. And he started out as a peddler. He was born in 1915. And in those days, the salesmen used to travel by train, and then they would go to the various farmhouses and commercial stores, and they'd seek business. But the Jewish peddlers did it on horse and wagon, and Baron Cohen started on horse and wagon, and there he met his wife, Shulman, of 50 years. And Baron was the greatest salesman that I've ever met. He was extremely likable. He was the chairman of the Philharmonic Society, the chairman of the country club, the chairman of all the fundraising operations. And when you asked him how business was, he'd always say, everything's up except my whittler. And I always think about that when we have a day like this where everything's at the high. And then I think of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, because some ignoramus there, or was it someone who collaborated from the National Bureau, concluded that commodity prices are ephemeral and that they shouldn't be taken into account in the inflation statistics. Now we have grains at the high, soybeans at $12. It's the highest it's been in 6 years. Wheat is the highest it's been in 6 years. Even live cattle. Hillary would be making money if she didn't really, if she didn't short the market. Actually, she was amazing. They asked her how she made so much money, and she said, well, I read the Wall Street Journal, but the problem was the Wall Street Journal didn't have any cattle reports. Then they asked her again, and she said, well, I took it, I just felt bullish on cattle. And the problem was that all her money was made on the short side. But today, live cattle's at an all-time high, had a little dip because of the pandemic. Now, with everything at an all-time high, now how long can it continue? Bitcoin was at an all-time high.
Right. And later on, we'll talk to your friend Andrew Aiken about Bitcoin. He's going to join us later.
He's one of the most astute speculators that I've met in my life. And he knows everything about statistics. He was the director of research, or a leading researcher for Pfizer. And he knows everything about the skinny, about when the various drug companies knew about the results of the vaccine.
Right.
I hope he'll tell us about it. Maybe he'll want to be confidential about it. Now, what did you see in the market today? I hope you were long, because if you were long, anyone who was long would have done nothing but make money, especially if they held it from the close yesterday.
Yeah, I didn't really do much again. It's not my kind of day when it's narrow range, and today we had 14-point range with not really clear moves. It's the kind of day that you like to say the machines make money, not the people. So not really anything for me.
Well, today was a day that it took courage. And that is probably one of the most important features that a person can have in trading the market, to have the courage to go against the ripples that occur every day, and especially to have courage that the market's going to end up, stock market's going to end up, as you know, because it goes up 60,000 fold a century. What's happening in the world of science? Any fake news there? Any alternates to the vaccines that are coming down the pike?
Well, it looks like here in Florida, we're going to have vaccination started next week. The doctors are going to be vaccinated. The first patient vaccinated in America was in Tampa here. And next week, we're going to start vaccinating doctors as well. There were a few.
Let us hope that all the prison inmates are who I think are next in line to be vaccinated, and all the people with alternative ideas on sexual preference, that they will be in general. Go on. What were you going to say?
Well, in Florida, we're going to vaccinate the doctors first. I think Florida is a little less woke than the rest of the country. So there were a few adverse effects found for the vaccine. Somebody got an allergic reaction to it that didn't have any allergies before. So people are apprehensive, but the doctors in Florida that I spoke to are very happy to take the vaccine. And I'm hoping that this will finally open up the country, because it's been insane so far. And like you said, the market is going up in spite of half the country being shut down.
But our mantra is that the more woke it is, the better it is for the market. However, there is another market that is at an all-time high, and that is the likelihood of the Democrats winning the Georgia election. And it's now 66% against them, whereas a week or two ago it was 80%. So
Wow.
it keeps getting reduced. I noticed that the media is still adhering to its favorite role of hiding all the anti-woke news. In my state, where it's snowing and it was below 30 all day. Governor Cuomo was accused of sexual harassment.
Right, a couple of days ago, but
That's
nothing
been
about
hidden.
it.
There's been a lot of new news about Hunter Biden. That's been hidden. What are you going to do when there are so many things stacked against you? In my rackets career, I often faced an adversary who was completely unbeatable, had perfect strokes and was fast. And
What did you do?
what did I do in a situation like that?
Right.
Well, for the first year that I played, I lost every practice match. And the only time I won was when my opponent had such a bad odor about him that the only way I could incentivize myself to win was to get off the court quickly. But in general, what I did, I didn't give up when my adversary was perfect, and I wouldn't. Unfortunately, it looks like the incumbent isn't going to give up also, even though the chances are, according to the prediction markets, are about 0%. Unfortunately, I think one of the grievances against him is that he's a very bad loser, and that he's very, in addition to his integrity being questionable. And
Well, I think he's mostly doing it by and large because the people who voted for him want him to continue. 95% of Republicans think that the election is stolen and they want him to continue fighting. So the last thing
well, from my 100 years of experience, I would say that people always despise a bad loser. That's something that every human has in his DNA, and everybody feels that the incumbent.
I would have to disagree with that because
Okay, you can disagree.
The Republican Party has been gracefully losing for years, and I think people are really tired of that. How much more losing can we do? At some point, somebody's got to stand up and fight, and I think that's one of the things people like about Trump is that he doesn't just give up and he keeps fighting. This is his both. Maybe perhaps some people don't like him and some do, and so people are just tired of losing. That's why one of his slogans Trump had was, "Are you tired of winning yet? You know, we're going to keep winning and winning," because people are tired of the losing party, essentially.
Well, people don't like someone who's boastful. That's a universal part of
Yes.
the DNA also. They don't like someone who's not loyal to his employees. And
Yes.
as you say, he had to work with 98% of the employees of the government who voted against him.
And he managed to fire Jeff Sessions, who was the one who actually did vote for him. So the irony is there.
And then it looks like he fired Bill Barr also. There's no reason that Bill Barr couldn't have stayed another 2 weeks and filled out his term. And it's very unfortunate when you see someone who's boastful and disloyal and a poor loser. And we'll have to have separate views on as to whether, in any case, I think that fighting the the election now, when the chances are so small,
Oh.
is going to hurt him in Georgia, that people are going to be disgusted with it. I noticed that also that you hardly see anything about Sidney Powell's various suits,
Right.
about the statistics that are so amazingly 1 in a million that the votes could have been that way, that they could have been such a small percentage of mail-in votes that were thrown out. It was 3 or 4% that the mail-in votes were ruled ineligible for the previous elections, and in this election they increased the number of mail-in votes by 50%, and yet only 1% were thrown out.
Right, but go ahead.
Go on.
But that's the whole point about Georgian election, that the Republicans are likely to lose for multiple reasons. One of them, like you mentioned, the mail-in vote. If there was fraud in this election, and statistics show that it was, why wouldn't there be fraud in Florida, in Georgia? If you have been successful once, why wouldn't you try it again? That's number one. And number two, many of the Trump voters actually not going to vote this time, not for the reasons you said, that they don't like him. That's probably another group. But one group is not going to vote for him because for the Republicans, because they feel like they have betrayed Trump as well. And they're really not motivated to vote, thinking that their votes are going to be stolen. So a multitude of reasons.
Well, how could, getting back to something that we know about, how could every market be at a high? The grains, the meats, the gold was at a 20-day high. Bitcoin's at an all-time high. With all these markets at a high, how can it not lead to inflation? The dollar's at a low. The yen is 103. It was about 2 weeks ago. It was 110. The euro is 122. About 3 weeks ago, it was 117 or 118. One of the reasons that the market's going up is because the dollar is so weak. It makes to the foreigners, they have to pay less of their own currency to buy the U.S. market, and in general, the lower the U.S. dollar, the higher the stock market is. So everybody's talking about the fact that the dollar will sink another 10%. If that happens, the stock market will go up another 10%. Okay, has Andy joined us yet?
No, not yet. Do you have any other tips for day traders while we are waiting for him?
I have some very important tips for day traders. I know a lot about that. I've experienced many bodies that have been broken by day trading. The first thing that you have to know as a day trader is to take account of VIG, of the house take, how much the house takes away from you on every trade. Now, we've heard about the evilness of the market infrastructure, and the market infrastructure has spent maybe $1 billion to execute their trades faster than you. And if you ever try to make a trade to buy a share of a stock, or to buy or sell a future, you'll find that always there is a high frequency trader that's ahead of you. They pay lower commissions. In fact, they receive a stipend from the markets. They probably know exactly who's trading. They probably have access to that. But in any case, they take out, let's say, $100 million a day between all of them. Some of them have made money every day for the last 20 years.
Right.
Okay, now, on an average trade, say, let's take the stock market futures. Say you buy it at 3,700, and then we're very happy it goes to 3,702. The problem is if you try to buy it at 37, someone will be ahead of you. You'll get it at 37.25, and you'll sell it at 31.75. You'll pay about $5 in commission, which is another 10 cents. Then, of course, you have to worry about being forced out because of margin. But in any case, on a 2-point trade, you give up about 50 cents. So the house take on a given trade is somewhere in the order of 10 or 15% of your average profit. Now, in sports betting, if you make, they take out 5.5%, and they're very profitable. No one can beat the sports betting, and they say that all you need to beat them is to be accurate 52% of the time. In any case, in dice, they take out something like 1 or 2%, and roulette, Monte Carlo takes out 3%. Those houses never lose. That's the main mantra, that you don't expect to win if you gamble. Now, if all the big houses can make money taking 3% out and they never lose, how can you possibly try to make money if you're giving out from 10 to 20% of your trade? So the first rule is, of course, keep the house take as low as possible. Second is go for bigger swings. Don't go for 2 points, because at least the house take will be lower on that. In fact, then the big houses are so profitable that they don't like to take positions overnight. If you're day trading, you want to take positions overnight.
Right.
So
well, looks like Andrew is waiting in the waiting room, so let's let him in, and we'll continue with the.
Will you introduce him for a second? I'll be right back.
Sure. Oops. Hello?
Hi.
Andrew, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Great. Welcome. Victor will be right back, and he stepped out for a second. For people who don't know you, Victor has introduced you as a very savvy investor, and we're going to talk to you about Bitcoin today.
Great. Excellent.
Well, I guess maybe start in general before Victor gets in here. Before we talk about price and where it's going and all the risks, maybe you can just tell us, what is Bitcoin to you? Is it just an investment to protect against the dollar devaluation, given the popularity of the MMT, modern monetary theory, and potential inflation, sort of like gold used to be? Or is it the currency of the future, where you truly believe that it's going to replace all of the currencies in the world and be an alternative currency?
To me, it's a bit of both. I've been involved. I wasn't one of the very first wave of investors in it and participants in it. I do know some people who were, but it was really 2013 that I started getting involved, and then uh, have been more and more involved in it since then. But I'd say what interested me about it was the way that it emerged. It emerged as a response to the financial crisis. That this is sort of the response by the creators of it, Satoshi Nakamoto, in the white paper and some of the documents that he or other posts that he made on different internet forums was in regard to, well, the nature of any kind of fiat financial system is to have these kind of bailouts and for the government to do these types of things and to use instrument tools like the Federal Reserve or institutions like the Federal Reserve to do them, or the Treasury. And so gold, as you say, historically has been a sort of rejection of that, at least since 1971, when the gold window was closed in the U.S. Uh, and so, but I think but Bitcoin represents something, and other cryptocurrencies, but I'd say Bitcoin is still the by far the predominant one. Is it takes that rejection of fiat and as an alternative to fiat currencies to another level, because it has portability in the way that gold doesn't. It has it literally exists in cyberspace. It's not something that you have to physically carry across borders or explain to customs officials why you have more than $10,000 worth of it, and so on. And so it has all of these. It does have a number of advantages over gold. I'm not. I personally believe in precious metals as an alternative to fiat, but I think that it's yet another alternative that's emerged.
So you don't think it has replaced gold completely? Because for millennials, Bitcoin is what gold used to be for, I guess, the boomer generation.
I think that's true, and I think that also there's I'm not a millennial myself. I'm sort of Gen X, more Gen X, but I know a lot of millennials that just by being involved in this space and just in my social life, and I'd say that is a little bit of an attitudinal difference from millennials and earlier generations, and I think that part of it comes from a legacy of the financial crisis, which I already mentioned, that a lot of them came of age or came out of school into a very forbidding economic environment where there was a lot more uncertainty than it existed in prior recessions. And the sort of thing I hear from a lot of people in, let's say, Zoomers and millennials is that sort of everything is owned already. Like all of these companies, they're established and they were built up and it's great, and they don't necessarily reject free markets or capitalism per se, but they feel a little bit like there's not the opportunity for them to build something from the ground up the way that it was for previous generations. And so cryptocurrency, and I'm using that term more broadly than just Bitcoin, like Ethereum, some of these other platforms are being used as almost like an alternative way to fund companies and to distribute them in a way to their customers, to their users. And so there's a lot of experimentation happening, and it did start with Bitcoin. It's still going on with Bitcoin, but I'd say Ethereum is a very another platform where there's a lot of experimentation in terms of how capital is used to fund a company, and the users and customers can be owners too.
Right. And for people
What's
who
the
maybe
way
not
to,
as,
what's the
go
way
ahead.
to play, what's the way to play Bitcoin and why has it gone up so much lately? What, you have a chart of it.
I think a couple things. I think a couple things. I think one is the just all risk assets going up. The S&P 5 is moving up right along with S&P 500 and other risk assets. But I think also there was uh, there was a bear market that that took it down to a, in the about a little above 3,000 in 2018 that followed its top in late 2017, and
Right,
then there was a secondary bottom in March of this year, which coincided right along with stock market and other markets. And so what I think that it's in a sense a high beta asset compared to other risk assets, and so it's been rallying because of that. But I think second, uh, I think there's that a lot of the doubts that some people had about Bitcoin and some of the other leading cryptocurrencies, the ones that will actually survive, um, they've been those doubts have been sort of allayed or been the objections have been taken away. And one of the big objections was, well, there's no support for this in mainstream finance, and that what investors or institutions are really buying this. And what's happened this year is there's been corporate treasuries like MicroStrategy, Square, and other companies that are adding this to their treasury, Bitcoin especially. And then there are some major investors like Paul Tudor Jones and Druckenmiller who have added this as a component of their funds. And I think that's given a green light to institutions. There are now a lot of companies like Coinbase and so on that offer custodial arrangements for institutions, and so some of these um, let's say institutions that are capabilities and different infrastructure that didn't exist 3 years ago when we last saw Bitcoin at this level or a little below, they exist now, and it makes it possible for a much broader set of investors, including institutions, to invest.
What's the
right,
best way,
and, go ahead.
what's the best way to play Bitcoin now?
Okay, I think I think one is to buy it directly. I think we might see a little bit of a pullback here over the next few days because it broke through its all-time high very convincingly and got almost to 24,000. I think we could see some. So really, there's no sort of resistance in the sense of like a price level, except psychological resistance. I think there could be some maybe a pause at around 25,000 and then maybe at 50,000 because those correspond to 500 billion and 1 trillion in total capitalization. But I think that there could be a pullback here over the next few days, and I think it could be a good entry point, especially if it stays above the 20,000 level, and so it may be a good point to jump in with a little bit. And I have a long-term position that I hold in both Bitcoin and Ethereum, and I'll use it as a chance to maybe lever up a little bit. There are some ways to have leverage bets either through futures or through some of the online exchanges, and so I might add a little bit of leverage if it has a let's say a 10% pullback from here.
Well, you mentioned that there is a brokerage house that is selling at its book value that has about $400 million of Bitcoin in assets supporting its value.
Right. So what? Sorry, what was the question?
What's the brokerage house that trades Bitcoin who are
Oh,
selling
right
at book
now
value?
it's probably about 420 billion, and so I think that around just under 25,000 per Bitcoin would correspond to a 500 billion market cap, and then just under 50,000 would be a 1 trillion market cap. And so I think there's might be some reluctance to push through those levels.
Well, aside from Bitcoin, what do you recommend in cryptocurrency?
What price?
No,
Yeah.
what other?
What are the cryptocurrencies? Ethereum?
Oh, what other cryptocurrencies? I think that clearly the sort of the silver to Bitcoin's gold, in my view, is Ethereum, and so Ether is maybe a bit undervalued here compared to Bitcoin. It's currently trading at a ratio of about 0.028 in terms of price, one Ether to one Bitcoin. And given some of the developments that are happening in Ethereum, I think it's a bit undervalued here. So it's anywhere from about 40% to 70% undervalued, which would correspond to a ratio of 0.04 to 0.05. And so I think if Bitcoin holds above the 20,000 level, then Ether could have a very strong rally and could end up in, let's say, 800 range or so. And so I think that it's the one to hold after Bitcoin. I think Bitcoin should be the sort of in any crypto portfolio should be sort of the cornerstone. But then Ether is a very good one to hold. I think it's undervalued. Another one is Cardano that I think has some of the there are sort of competitors to Ethereum. I don't really consider Cardano a direct competitor to Ethereum. They're trying some different things, and the founder has or one of the founders, one of the leaders right now, Charles Hoskinson, has more of a let's say a cultural or an attitude that is more like the initial perspective of the Bitcoin founders, and that's a little bit of a contrast to Bitcoin or to Ethereum. Sorry, so Cardano, which is ADA is the ticker. Could be another one, but it's a little bit more of a long shot than Ethereum.
Can I ask you about valuations? You mentioned that Ethereum is undervalued compared to Bitcoin. And Barron had a tweet the other day that the fair value for Bitcoin is $12,000, which is about half that it is trading right now. But how do you even value something like this that has any kind of intrinsic value to it at all?
Well, there's there's a lot of contention on that issue, and I think there is a way to value them. There's not just like with stocks, although there could be some preferred valuation methods. There's no reason why a stock can't go below book value or below its cash value, and so on. And so you can have some extreme valuations even in stocks that may be high quality stocks. But I think there's some methods for valuing this that are maybe a bit some might be more accepted than others, and so the one that might be the most accepted valuation method would be something based on the network value, and so there are some different there are some different models of what the value of a network is. And those have been used to come up with a valuation of Bitcoin or Ethereum. What with something like Ethereum, though, there's where it's really a platform to um, build other cryptocurrencies. There, one of the innovations that's emerging there is what's called decentralized finance or DeFi, and some people listening might have heard about that, read about it, or even using it. And there are some platforms that in which over $12 billion have been locked in these different decentralized finance platforms, and they're an opportunity for people to earn yield on even let's say dollar linked cryptocurrencies, and they can earn a return that's much higher than what's available in a bank, a traditional bank, for example. So the fact that there's a certain amount of value that's locked on the platform
One more,
is a
one more.
support for the price for Ethereum. But I think the network value is one, but then what I'm a little bit less confident in methods that might compare it to, let's say, the total value of gold traded, these types of things, monetary alternatives. I'm not quite convinced that Bitcoin is a direct kind of plug-in replacement for gold or traditional currencies. It's a little bit of it's a speculative instrument, but it's also potentially down the line. If there are a couple, let's say, smaller countries that adopt it as a reserve or one currency in their reserves, then it, at that point it could become more accepted as a currency. But I think that's a little bit in the future still. But I think some of the network valuation methods.
What do you mean by network
and
valuation? Is this how widely it's used? What does it mean?
so there's so the theory is that uh, that in a computer network or any kind of network, that there's a value. So for example, think of something like LinkedIn, where it's just a strict social network, and so there's a value to your own social network, to your professional network. You may use it to find a job, or but uh, I'm trying to let me just think. The method that is often used is what's called the NVT, and what that is the it's a network to value model that is based on a theory called let's see, it's there's oh, I'm trying to remember what the theorem is, but it's there's a it's essentially the idea is that there's the network value is proportional to the square of the number of users, and I forget the name associated with it, but the idea is that if you have that is proportional to the
Stack to
square
flow
of the
you're
number
talking
of
about, or
users.
something else?
I'm sorry.
Stack to flow. That's one of the most popular
Yes.
models.
Yeah, and so it's so there's a variety of methods. One is it's called you can look up, say, NVT model, and it's network value divided by the which could it could also you can use proxies for that, such as how much value is transmitted per day divided by the total market cap, and create a ratio from that. But if you're looking at that ratio, then something like Ethereum is much more undervalued
Right.
than Bitcoin. There's actually more value that's transacted on Ethereum now than Bitcoin, even though its market cap is
By the
much
way,
less.
Ethereum is going to be traded on the CME starting February 8th.
Oh, it is. Wow.
Yes. The Bitcoin's been on for 3 years, and
But it didn't catch on. It seems like the Bitcoin futures never really took off as they were
Right.
hoping to. As a matter of fact, it was pretty much marked to the top, or pretty much close to the top in Bitcoin at the time.
Some people say that it created the top, in fact, that it created
Right.
a speculative top. Well, part of the problem is that with that is that those futures were never deliverable in Bitcoin. They were always cash deliverable, and whereas some of there are Ethereum futures that are if they're not already widely traded, they're going to be, but they are deliverable in Ether, and so they're physically deliverable, and that kind of fits with what the Ethereum people with that team or those teams, they view it as they consider it gas for the network. It's sort of the what makes the network go, and you have to pay all the fees in Ethereum, but it's also used as a stand-in currency. And so the fact that there are physically deliverable futures, I think, could make it kind of have some characteristics of a commodity, but some characteristics of currency, sort of in between the two. But I think part of the problem with the Bitcoin futures, as you say, never caught on. They were always illiquid, and they've already been dropped by, I believe it was CME stopped trading Bitcoin futures, but the CBOE still has theirs. But it's probably not, just because it's so illiquid compared to other
Where's the
other
best?
underlying.
Where's the best place to buy? And what's the best
Exchange.
way for someone who's not in cryptocurrencies to get involved? What would you suggest?
Well, the one where there's more trading volume than any other is Binance. It's like finance, but with a B. But I also think that Coinbase is very good, and they have a trading platform but they've got one for let's say more serious traders, but then they have one for institutions as well that's called Coinbase Prime. And so they offer a kind of prime brokerage service, but for cryptocurrencies. And so depending on sort of the volume you're trying to trade and whether you want to do OTC or not, which would be for much larger trades, then it could be that Coinbase might be a little better, but Binance is probably a very good one for if someone wants to see the full scope of different cryptocurrencies, including the smaller ones. And so that's why Binance really has emerged as the leader in the market. It's where is the highest trading volume of any exchange now.
And Coinbase is just filed for IPO, so they're going public. So that probably would give them more money to improve the infrastructure even better.
Exactly, but the thing about Coinbase though is they really have been a leader for a long time in helping along the adoption of cryptocurrencies. And they haven't just been in it for the money. I think there really is a passion there. Not to say there isn't with the Binance founders, but I think Coinbase has been around since I think 2011, 2012, and they although they may be sort of a lot of people sort of love to hate them, they're also very respected within the market.
What do you think about Kraken?
What's the bid and ask on Coinbase? The bid and ask.
What about it?
What's the spread? What percentage?
So let's see. So the spread on Coinbase right now is for Bitcoin is usually pretty tight on Coinbase, and I would say pretty tight on Binance as well. There's a U.S. the Binance is the original one is only for ex-US, and now they have a US Binance US. But Coinbase has always been for US and for US traders. Let's see, I'm having a little trouble getting it up with Zoom, but it's usually about it. I would say about what I've usually seen the spreads be is around let's say 0.1 or 0.2% on Coinbase.
Andy, you worked for a big pharmaceutical company or two, did you not?
Yes,
How long have
I
you
do.
worked? How long have you worked for them? For those pharmaceutical?
Let's see, almost about 9 months, 9-10 months now. Mhm.
No, you worked for Pfizer for.
Oh, you mean in the industry in
Yeah.
general? I've been in the industry for almost 20 years. So.
And what was your position then in the industry? What was your position? Were you director of research, or you were a researcher?
I lead analytics at the company. That's what I've done. Analytics, data science at these companies where we're helping to either bring products to market or commercialize existing products.
So what do you think about the Pfizer vaccine and them not releasing the results until right after the election, which they probably had before?
Well, they could have. I have worked for Pfizer and worked very closely with the vaccines organization. I'm maybe less familiar with the internal politics as I was, let's say, 3-4 years ago when I was still there. But based on my understanding, they were they had enough patients where they had results prior to the election, weeks before the election, and could have released it. I think there's a lot of though there's been maybe some distaste for the Trump administration and the pharma industry, especially among big pharma, because it are perceived to be inimical or confronting the pharma industry, especially on issues like pricing, and really put them in a kind of a negative light on pricing, and signed some executive orders that maybe they didn't change the business model that much, but they were viewed as being very negative to the industry. And so I think it was a little bit of maybe, I don't want to say retribution, but let's say a response to that. I don't, but I think there are different pharma companies also have, just like in any other industry, there are different cultures at the top of the company. And although many pharma companies may be more aligned with Republicans in general, or Republican policy, and for example, the one that Mitch Daniels, who worked for the Bush administration, worked for, was Eli Lilly, and the leadership of that company. Maybe not now. I'm a little bit less familiar with the leaders now, but they were historically very much aligned with Republican administrations. And
Right,
the current, yeah.
Take us through the double-blind trials. I read that the results are reported contemporaneously to the FDA.
Mm-hmm.
As what happens? How do they determine who's sick and who has the symptoms and who's not? And are the placebos a random sample? And
Right,
are the
exactly.
samples
So
that they use, are they samples that they use? It's hard to believe that 45,000 people who agree to stay with the procedure for several months is a random sample. They have to be a very special group to start with.
right. And there weren't that many patients in this trial. There just couldn't be, because in any kind of trial like this, the protocol is going to be that the patient can't have a lot of complicating circumstances, and so they'll want to get as clean a trial as they can. So that's one. But in a double-blind trial, as you say, even the doctors don't know who's getting placebo, who's getting the treatment, but if the treatment is successful, then everybody will know. The doctors will know. They'll know. They'll stop the trial. Like this often happens with cancer drugs. They'll stop they won't give placebo in a cancer trial, but in trials.
Who vets the results? Is there a group of scientists who are consultants to the FDA who determine what the results are and then report it to various agencies? It seems to me that the FDA knew well in advance that the trials were very successful.
Okay, so there will be what's called a clinical trial administrator, and that's a job that's within the pharma company, and they are almost always MD plus PhD and so on. So they have the credentials and so on, and to lead the analysis. So there would be people that are internal to the pharma company that would do the data analysis, and then they put together a package that then they submit to the FDA, and then there are people at the FDA with the same backgrounds that go through all the data and so on themselves, and they verify it, and it has to then go to a panel that formally reviews it, and then it goes to the main FDA.
I mean, it's impossible that the results wouldn't be known months in advance.
Right.
Right. How is it possible that, like Victor said, so many people are involved and so many people knew that the vaccine is successful, yet every news media reported that it's extremely unlikely we're going to have the vaccine by the year end, you need a miracle, and here we are having a miracle.
Right. Well, yeah, and yes.
Christmas miracle.
Not just the Pfizer drug too. It was
Right.
the Pfizer, Moderna, and we're very close to having a GSK one as well. And I do credit what's called Operation Warp Speed for this, because what this did, it wasn't really the funding. What it did is it allowed the pharma companies to run the multiple stages of trials, as long as they were going well, to run them partially in parallel with one another, instead of having to do them successively, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. They could start running phase 3, which is just the final trial, right as phase 2 was still going on. And so this was a regulatory change that Trump made in order to speed this process along, and I think it's completely 100% responsible for making this happen this year. But the response of
Pfizer was very blatant in saying that the Operation Warp Speed had nothing to do with their success.
Right.
They say that they didn't take any money from Operation Warp Speed, but it was never about the money. It was always about the regulatory change in terms of how they run trial. And this is the sort of thing that a pharma company would have loved to have, but because of the politics of COVID and the election, it was no one wanted to acknowledge that it was a very positive thing. If we had this sort of regulatory change for, let's say, certain types of cancer or Alzheimer's, we could see a much more rapid development there too. But it's there's the politics of the companies themselves the big companies themselves don't want that to happen, because it enables smaller competitors to come in and leapfrog them. And so it's regulations often used as a barrier to entry more than it is for big players, rather than ensuring safety and so on. It does that, but
is there anything
it's
else
all,
wrong with double-blind studies? Aside from the fact
on this
that,
particular
well,
one,
so,
or
no,
in general.
I mean, they say that the cost of bringing a new drug to market is usually $500 million, and it takes 2 to 3 years. Shouldn't that be?
Right. Well, there's some. The total cost of drug development, when you account for the failures, is something like $2 billion or now maybe $3 billion per new drug. There were 49. There have been 49 novel breakthrough drug approvals in 2020, and which is much higher than it was. Let's say 10 years ago, it was something like 19 in a year. And the type of drugs that are getting approved now are actually doing something, first treatments for different rare diseases. But I think the way to reduce those costs would be to have something like an Operation Warp Speed, just in general, allow companies to run trials in parallel and instead of sequentially, and that would at least start to break down some of the regulatory hurdles.
What's your view about the stock market? Is this a good time to buy with everything at a high?
I'd say it's hard to buy at a high, but in a way it's sort of money trying to find a home in my view, and it's hard to get too bearish given the fact that the incoming Treasury Secretary is has reputation of being a dove as Fed chair, and I don't think that I think the policy is going to stay very accommodative in light of whatever lockdowns are coming.
I noticed
so the irony will be that
the market has set a new high 67 days in 2020. Out of 242 trading days, 30% of all the days have been an all-time high, or what I call a 20-day high for the stock market. Do you think that will continue? I do.
I don't see how it can continue,
it's been like that
but
since 2011. That's part of the Dimson and Lori studies, the 60,000-fold a century drift of the stock market. Andy, thank you. Do you have any other advice for our listeners?
It's as we discussed before, although it seems like it can't continue, it's a good way to become poor is to bet against it not continuing, or to bet that it will not continue. And so to bet against the stock market is a good way to lose money.
And I have a quick question before you go. Do you keep your cryptocurrency on the exchange or in the cold storage, or do you trust the exchange to keep your currency safe from hacking?
I would say the correct answer is to keep it on cold storage, but that might not be for everybody, especially if it's a trading position. So I would say if you're anything that's a long-term buy, to hold it in cold storage, like a cold wallet, hardware wallet. But if you've got a portion that you're trading, I think it's okay to keep it on an exchange as long as it's let's say an insured exchange like Coinbase. They have insurance on all their crypto, 100% insured at Lloyd's
by
of
default.
London.
The insurance is by default. You don't need to buy it, right? It's a guarantee, like default insurance.
Correct. Well, that's correct. Yes, it is default insurance. That's correct.
And I guess another quick question. Go ahead. Okay.
Go ahead.
Not crypto question. Do you know, for those studies for the vaccine, did they filter out people with pre-existing conditions and issues Were those mostly healthy people, or did they have a fair share of people over 80, two pre-existing conditions?
Well, they don't want to have people that, they'll filter out people that have like something like clinical obesity or COPD, anything that could either they wouldn't respond or they might have a adverse event related to the vaccine or treatment itself, one, or two, they might have higher morbidity. And so they don't want to confound the results by having patients. So it would be patients that are otherwise healthy, but they get
Who's over
COVID,
70
and
years
how do they
old that
respond
doesn't
to
have a condition? I mean, there aren't any
Exactly.
old people
Well,
that are symptom
so
free.
that's why the number of patients is in the hundreds, is because of
Pfizer had
them
45,000
limiting.
their studies.
Right.
But they couldn't have
Right.
had a representative sample of old people because almost 90%.
That's right. And look at the people that are getting the vaccine first. It's healthcare workers and so on. I mean, they're not a representative sample either. They're exposed again to COVID patients, and so is that it's
Right.
there are all these kind of questions that I agree completely. It's but that's the strategy that a pharma company uses because they don't want to submit it to the FDA, and the FDA comes back and says we can't approve this because there were all of these patients that confound the results.
One more quick question: Do you know how long the vaccine lasts? Does FDA know? When would they know? How often do you need to take this vaccine so to have protection?
That's a great question. There are people. Well, just look at the disease itself. There are people who were saying from the beginning that you have no immunity to this. You can catch it again. But there's been no widely documented cases. Maybe some one-offs, but no real phenomenon of there being like a second catching it twice. And so if the vaccine is what the vaccine does, at least the Pfizer vaccine and Moderna, they're mRNA vaccines, which sort of instructs the cell how to repel the virus. And so it's a new type of vaccine. Theoretically, this gives an immunity that could be for a very long time. For let's say 3 years, 5 years is what it is ordinarily a vaccine for something like pneumonia. It's supposedly good for let's say 5 years, but or other diseases like tetanus, it could be for 10 years. So theoretically, it could be for a long time. But if there are mutations of the virus, it could run out next year, and they have to make some sort of change.
So the immunity from vaccine should last as long as the immunity if I had COVID?
Right. That's right. So, at least theoretically. I think we'll find out some things. I don't think it's like some of the real negatives that we're hearing could potentially be true. I'm not sure that'll bear out that way, but I think we'll find that there's some positives and negatives about each of the vaccines, and some that might be better for certain types of patients than others.
Andy, what's your view on the efficacy of banning indoor dining and lockdowns, wearing masks? I noticed
Well,
the
study that I saw, something like 1.4% of cases can be attributed to restaurants, and yet New York City is locking down all the indoor dining again in the middle of winter, and it's not going to be exactly pleasant to try to dine in a tent in the middle of the street if it's 10 degrees outside. So they're basically going to kill the restaurant industry in New York, and so I think I think it's ridiculous, and it's not even backed by science. It's sort of theatrics, COVID theatrics, more than it is a something that's really going to do something to stop the disease spread.
And the
Well, how's the
value of,
tent different from being indoors? If you're in the tent, you're in the same confined space as if you're indoors. So I'm not sure I'm following
Right,
the difference here.
and the value of wearing
right.
masks, Andy, the value of wearing masks is what?
Oh, masks.
The value of what? I'm sorry.
Wearing masks.
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 Sorry, it was
Do you think there is a value in wearing masks for COVID?
oh, to mass. Well, oh, I'm sorry. Well, if you're maybe in certain situations that it makes sense. And the way that I always thought of it from the very beginning was that that if that the big mistake that was made in terms of policy was treating it like the only that they were trying to manage it like a social problem, a collective risk problem, when in fact if everybody acted in a way that minimized their own risk individually, we would have had a much better result. In other words, there might be like if I go on a subway or something, it might make sense to wear a mask, but if I'm visiting family, well, no, if I know they don't have it, or somebody's already had it, then it might not make sense at all. Or if I'm with friends, these types of things don't make any sense at all. But they, like in California, where they're telling people that they have to wear a mask. Well, I guess they're banning indoor dining in Los Angeles and some other cities, but
They're
but in
banning
California, I
walking
think the
altogether.
policy.
There are exceptions to
Right,
the
yeah,
strip
but
clubs.
yeah, I don't see how any of the thing maybe I don't understand, with the exception of the Supreme Court holding that the New York policy of banning religious gatherings, was struck down, at least partially. That I'm astounded that there haven't been more legal challenges to these things, stopping
Exactly.
people from
Exactly.
getting together or religious events. It's just I don't see how any of this passes constitutional muster, regardless of
Right.
the seriousness of it.
And Andy,
It just seems.
what individual stocks are you buying these days?
I actually bought. Let's see. I've been buying some a few what I consider to be undervalued biotech stocks. One is Bluebird Bio, which they had some very negative news in October or early November. They had delays on one of their trials, and it killed their stock and knocked it way down. And I bought a little of that, thinking
Do you have
that
a ticker for this?
would.
If you know?
It's
symbol?
Blue, BLUE, and they are a gene therapy company that is developing a gene therapy for sickle cell anemia and some other things. But that could be, I think, a winner long term. But they have some. It's going to take a little time to play out. Another one is Frequency Therapeutics, another biotech that I bought that's based in Massachusetts, and they have some interesting treatments for hearing loss. But I'm pretty familiar with that company, and I think they could have a product come to market in the next 2 years. But then the other one that I bought in over the summer, I bought a lot of Annaly, which they are a mortgage REIT, and they got knocked down to, I'm going to say, like 4 or 5, and they're back up to around 8. But they have a very nice dividend yield that they pay, and I think it continue to rally as long as the let's say the housing market holds up. But let me think of some of the others that I've been buying recently. Maybe the I did have some gold stocks. I've been I sold some of those about a month or so back. I might consider buying some back. There's been a bit of a pullback in gold, and I think it could be a good time to buy some of those, but more as a trade than a long-term hold.
Andy, we used to have a little partnership, and you did very well for me. Unfortunately, it got, yes, you were one of my best traders. You were making a very good return before you started working with me, and afterwards. What's been your return in your average rate of return in the last 5 years? When I was at your wedding, everybody spoke very highly about your stock market abilities.
I've gotten over the past 5 years, I've gotten about a 40% annual return, and that's across everything. And so I feel like I've gotten a good return on average, despite some challenging markets.
Does your new wife trade stocks? Your new wife?
She does not. So she lets. So we're not competing on that front, but she does not. But we do talk about it. She has a very good understanding of the market, but she's not a trader herself.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Andy. I hope you'll come back and enlighten us in the future. Thank you.
Well, it's great talking with you, and thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks. Good night.
Okay.